this episode of the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the 2022 Roland Garros in the French Open, both on the men's side and on the women's side. And I think we're going to be starting with the women's side, and particularly talking about the final. And there were just a few, certain themes that we noticed with some of the players that were playing. But I think both of the finalists, Iga Swiatek, who ended up winning, who won her second French Open title and her second major title, over Coco Gauff, an 18-year-old who has had a lot of hype around her the last few years, deservedly so, having beaten top players since the age of 15, I believe, and has, I think, in this tournament, really had in certain ways a breakthrough that she hasn't had up to this point, reaching a major final, her first major final, I believe. She's actually the youngest Grand Slam finalist since 2004, since Maria Sharapova. So really making strides in her game, and I think that really showed in that final as well, where Iga Swiatek now is at 35 matches won in a row. And we've talked about her quite a bit on this podcast. If people are interested, you can check out some of our earlier episodes. For instance, she won the 2020 French Open women's singles as well. And we talked about her a lot in that episode. And really in my view, what has set her apart, one of the factors that has set her apart is really her dedication to the mental side of the game. She works with a sports psychology professional, Daria Abramowitz, full time. And, many players are working closely with sports psychology professionals, but I think what has really separated her is her dedication to it, where she's been very open about how seriously she's taken it, how much, Daria is part of the team. Even after the final, she wrote something on the camera about thank you to her team, and mentioned three people, Daria being one of them. But as it relates to the final itself, I think Iga was definitely the front runner, definitely the favorite. And, to me, it seemed like Coco maybe felt that as the match started, went down those first few games, I believe it was 4-0, and started to settle in, won a game there, I think at either 4-0 or 5-0, and the match ended up being 6-1, or sorry, the match ended up being 6-1, 3-1, where it seemed that, at a certain point in the match, Coco started to settle in, started to loosen up a little bit and find her game. And I will mention also that, her body language and just, her composure throughout was strong, was solid, was not showing, negativity, as you might expect from somebody reaching their first final, and also, on the other side of somebody who's on such a long winning streak and such a big favorite. But no, I think in terms of that final, in terms of some of the main things that I saw were just, strong body language throughout from both of them. Iga, I think, being that front runner, almost using that to her advantage, sort of keeping her foot on the gas throughout. And I think those were some of the themes as it relates to the final. I think there's more to be said about each of them in terms of how they use their platform, in terms of sort of how they've gotten to this point, both of them at quite a young age, Iga at 21 and Coco at 18. But those were some of the things that I picked up from the final.
I think Coco Gauff, it's her first time there. Like you're saying, Josh, she handled herself well, composure-wise. She gave a lot of credit to Iga about Iga's level, especially at the beginning. I think she said that it was more about Iga playing well than, for her being nervous, being why, the first set went as it did. So, I think that's we may have all said, oh, well, she's really tight and that's why she's going down. We know that there's always a dynamic between the two players, and that certainly Iga was playing great tennis at the beginning, and that was probably more the driver of this entire match. Iga mentioned that the difference between 2020 and 2022, how she felt in that. Really, in 2020, she didn't know what she was doing. It was just all fresh experiences. And we talked about this in our episode. The mantra that she and Daria Abramovich had back then was more around keeping your expectations low and your standards high. And that's how she just got through the tournament. This time, she noted that it was different in that, in a way, she was more comfortable because she knew that she had done the work to get to where she was. And this win streak that she has is an example of simply doing the work every day. When one hears about a win streak, it tends to be more from other people. And so you feel then, maybe you feel the pressure of having to defend that. But when you're the one who's not talking about it and you're simply doing the work, it takes some of that pressure off. And I think we didn't see her succumb at all to the fact that she was going to surpass a record that Serena Williams had of 34 matches won in a row, and she did that in a really in a big stage, big match, and still was able to play great tennis. So I think looking at the two of them, it's really great for tennis to see such young players, nice players. I mean that more in that they're good people, good character players. They're professional in their behavior. So they set good examples for those following behind, that these are the things that one must do in order to become a champion. You have to do the work, you have to be professional. And as we'll talk about later, um, more of on a Rafael Nadal theme, it's really important to be a good person. You mentioned the idea of them using their platforms. So actually would want to hear that more from you, Josh. What were your impressions as the two of them have used their platform, on whether it's social justice or other themes of ethical and moral treatment of human beings?
Yeah, and I think this is actually a topic that we've discussed recently. We had Marcus Daniel on, top ATP doubles player who's the founder of High Impact Athletes, and talked a lot about how professional players can use their platforms to do good. And I think both of these finalists on the women's side are prime examples of this, doing it in their own way. And Coco Gauff, for instance, wrote on the camera after another horrible mass shooting at a school in the U.S., and wrote about gun violence, and wrote that on the camera, and used her platform, recognized her position of influence, of being out there, and use that in order to make that known, and to call for the end of this gun violence. And Iga Swiatek has, I think, throughout the tournament, and I think before it as well,
Yeah.
has had something on her cap, blue and yellow, symbolizing Ukraine and Ukraine's flag. And after the final as well, spoke out about Ukraine and what the people there are going through. So I think it does show that both of these finalists, at their age, and I think it's also in a certain way just a different generation, and maybe that generation feels more, prioritizes speaking out about social justice and social impact issues, but really both of them making their views known, trying to advocate for these positions and using their platforms to do so. So I definitely thought that was really commendable.
Yeah, and I think it goes along with the theme that we're human beings first, tennis players somewhere below that. And while we all want to be great tennis players, at a certain point, that's not the end of the world when we win or when we lose. So Iga Swiatek was telling a story in one of her press conferences about how the previous year, Nadal had lost to Djokovic, And she just coincidentally ran into Rafa the next day, and she was talking about how she was crying all night because Rafa had lost, and Rafa was like, "It's just a tennis match. You know, somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, but in the end, it's just a tennis match." And I think Iga took that in, and I also heard a bit of that philosophy from Coco Gauff. You know, when she was with her family after the final, everybody's crying, her brother's crying, and she's crying, and she was trying to tell her family, "Hey, it's just a tennis match. It's it's great that we're all here and so forth, but let's keep this in perspective." And I think part of the crying too is that they're together, and there's a lot of just that joy of being together in such a place. But in the end, I think these players are doing a great job of keeping things in perspective. That tennis is something that I do. I, of course, want to be as good at it as possible, right? That's one of my life projects. But I am also a human being who lives in the world and has certain experiences in the world. And I think this is important to me. And as you said, Josh, both of these players are using their platforms in different ways. We don't necessarily see other players taking time out of their speeches or writing things on the camera or posting on social media, but they may be doing different things. Or they may not, maybe just talking about things quietly. It, um, so I don't think there's any sort of thing to say about, well, hey, so and so doesn't do it or they do it. It's whatever you're comfortable doing, and it's all based on how you want to participate in the world. And I think it's great that the two of them have done this, and I think that just like we mentioned in our episode with Marcus Daniel, it doesn't mean you have to agree with what they're saying. But I think if you were to engage in a conversation with both of them, that they could easily defend their positions, from a moral and ethical perspective, right? They are clearly caring about people, and that's what they're speaking toward. Marcus Daniel clearly cares about people and making an impact. So I think there's a lot of respect to be shown to both Coco and Iga for how they are presenting themselves in this world.
Absolutely. And I think it's, it shows sort of, yes, they've matured as tennis players, but also, they've gotten to this point as people where they're ready to speak out about what they are passionate about and what's truly important to them. And yeah, as you said, Brian, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be doing this or that, everybody even um, feels the need to or feels comfortable with that, and that's fine. But I think it's it should be respected that people are able to do that. And I think just the one last thing I wanted to add about Coco Gauff, which I thought was it's actually a quote. And she talks about sort of the difference between where she's at right now and where she's gotten where she is mentally where and I thought she brought up a great quote just sort of comparing where she is right now compared to the past. And she said there's a fine line between believing in yourself and almost pushing yourself too much. Where she's talking about her semifinal victory, and then she was talking about last year where she ended up losing to Barbara Krejcikova, who ended up winning the championship. And she was saying that there were times in that match last year where she threw a racket onto the clay, and her quote was, "At that moment, I wanted it too much. Whereas now, I definitely want it. Yes, who wouldn't? But also, it's not going to be the end of the world if it doesn't happen for me." So saying yes, there's a big difference between, okay, I'm believing in myself. I know I can do it, but I'm not going to be pushing myself too much, almost trying too hard and almost viewing it as the end of the world if it doesn't happen. So to me, that's a real change of perspective, and it really shows the maturity that she now has, and also that she's learned from her experiences. Right, she's played against other champions, and through those experiences, and sometimes they're necessary to getting to that next level of growth. So you have these experiences, you get to a final, maybe you you only win a few games in the final, which happened in the women's final, also happened in the men's final. But maybe it's that experience itself that is necessary to getting to that next level, to learning and to growing for it for the future.
100%. And I think it was a great quote that you picked out there, Josh, because it shows her journey, right? And for all these players, it's a journey. There's no sort of, I don't think any of them have topped out. It's always about improving day to day. So we don't want to apply sort of a fixed mindset. Well, that's who she is right now. That's who she's always going to be. I think there's a lot of growth there for Coco Gauff. As you said, these are necessary experiences, especially when somebody reaches their first Grand Slam final. It's not unusual that people mess that up. And if they can take the experience as being a necessary one, open themselves up to the learning opportunity that that experience presents, they can grow from it. If it's an experience that they basically will not be open to learning from, then they can get stuck. You can plateau, I think, at that point, or not develop as a player. But I think both of these players, you could hear it in their words afterward, both Coco Gauff and Casper Ruud, that they went through this. It maybe didn't turn out exactly the way they wanted. They'd never been here before, but it was a great experience for them to build upon and grow from. And so I think that was a common theme between the two matches. Ruud playing, 13-time champion before the match, right? He became obviously 14-time champion afterwards. But that's a tough ask for playing your first major final as Rafael Nadal, at Roland Garros. Um, we were talking earlier, a lot of first-time champions, it's or first-time finalists don't win that first time when they're playing someone who's been there before. There are, of course, exceptions. You mentioned Maria Sharapova. She played Serena Williams in the final of Wimbledon and was able to win that, and she played brilliantly that day. But very often, the first-time finalist facing a past champion doesn't do great in that situation. And on American television, a question was asked of John McEnroe, who was uh, commentating for NBC. How did you feel in your first Grand Slam final? Because they were trying to relate this to how Ruud would be feeling, and he actually deflected to his first major semifinal, which was at Wimbledon, and he played against Jimmy Connors, and noted that extremely nervous, felt like he could barely get a ball in the first couple of sets, managed to eke out a set, but then lost in four, and said that that match was instrumental to him being able to win his first final. And in his first final, he played another first-time finalist in Vitas Gerulaitis. So, yeah, a lot of these experiences, if you can look at them as like, I maybe I needed to go there and screw it up and understand what went wrong, what went right, and so that I could be better. I think along the lines of trying too hard, Josh. We've talked about the idea of we had an episode on the performance equation, which is, just to remind people, your actual performance equals your potential performance minus sources of interference. Trying too hard is often a source of interference. It gets in the way. And it's great that Coco has realized how to let that go. And that's another one that you have to live through it to understand it, I think. I mean, I could say to somebody, all right, stop trying so hard, just let it happen. And it may not resonate right away. That it might take a little bit of time before one understands what that actually means. And so I think that it's great that she has realized this, and now she's more or less letting the experience happen, letting her tennis flow and happen a little bit more than just trying to force everything.
Definitely, definitely. And I think, as you said, it's easier said than done. Um, it's sometimes I think of, when I talk to an athlete and, I'm having a conversation with them, and I'll often bring that up. Hey, it's easier for us to talk about this now, and and think about it and think some of this stuff through. But when you're in the heat of the moment, it often is a lot harder to have that perspective and to know that. So it's a lot easier to say, okay, don't try so hard, play loose. Don't feel like you have to press or push too much to get there. But it's, you know, oftentimes you have to have that experience where maybe you didn't do that successfully, or you didn't do that as well as you would have liked, and you learn from it. And I think it actually relates a lot to um, a quote that we've talked about in the past, and actually came from an earlier episode where we interviewed Christina Rollo and Dave DeHaan, of this concept of everything is practice, right? And really what that means, or my interpretation of that, is that every experience that we have is simply practice for future experiences. So, okay, we're playing in this match, and maybe we didn't handle the pressure the way we would have liked. We feel like we're trying too hard, rather than focusing just on this match and almost seeing this match with tunnel vision as if this is the only match that's ever gonna that's the only important match. This match is simply a chance to learn and to practice for the future and to get better. So I think being able to sort of have the perspective that each opportunity is practice for future matches and future opportunities is first of all, it takes some pressure off, and second of all, it helps players understand that these experiences that they're having are instrumental in growing and developing and hopefully getting to that point where they're not running into these same patterns and these same cycles of these same types of things happening over and over again, but we can learn from it. And sometimes you have to go through that experience itself in order to get to that point where you can learn from it and move past it.
When you look at your tennis project as being one of mastery, then it's easier to do that rather than about winning titles. Um, it would be interesting to have a conversation with Dominic Thiem to see where he is, because I think we've talked about, his really big goal was to win a Grand Slam title, and was that perhaps too much in the forefront of his mind as opposed to being the best player he could be? I'm sure they were there, but it just seems like now he's really struggling, and it would be wonderful to have a conversation with him to try to see if we can get him onto that path of mastery and simply being the best you can be and stop trying so hard, because he might be trying too hard. Who knows? That's a different topic altogether. But for those who are interested in learning to change their perspective to less about winning and titles and more about mastery, there's a great book by George Leonard, simply entitled Mastery. And it might seem a little bit Zenish at first, but if you can really adopt, excuse me, and adapt to the perspectives that he talks about, I think you'll have a calmer mind and a calmer perspective on your tennis or anything else that you do in your life. And so I think it's an important aspect of things. And it brings me to something about Rafa, because I think Rafa is sort of becoming, maybe by default, the philosopher of the tennis tour. Um, and how he's talking about, because I think, the media gets very excited about this idea of 21 titles, 22 titles, etc. Who's going to have the most? Um, and whether you believe Rafa or not, he doesn't talk about that. He's simply talking about doing everything he can to continue to do something that he loves. And there's a lot of obviously struggle and pain going into that journey at the moment. Um, and so he's not out there trying to win 21 and 22 and think about 23. He's simply trying to do something that he loves. And to me, Josh, that's very similar to what you were mentioning with Coco. I'm not trying to do these things. I'm just out there letting my tennis happen. And I find it interesting that he's actually the one, if there is a race between these three, he's actually the one who's ahead because it's almost like he's not trying to be ahead. He's just trying to do what he does, trying to do what he loves. And it's just flowing and happening. I mean, if he hadn't had that injury in Indian Wells and maybe the foot recurrence this spring, the guy's having a brilliant year. I mean, he started off undefeated, got all the way to the Indian Wells final, and obviously had something going on. What an amazing start to a year for a guy who we weren't even sure would be able to play this year. So it's not about, I don't think it is about that 21, 22, maybe 23. I think it's just like he says, I believe him. He just simply wants to see how long he can keep doing something he really loves, and he has to make the decision about how much intervention and pain he's willing to endure to keep that going.
Yeah, I think his perspective and his mindset have been a big reason for that success that he's had. And I mean, he just celebrated his 36th birthday. I think actually on yesterday during the finals, and he this is the first year in his career that he has won both the Australian Open and the French Open the same year. In theory, having a chance for the Grand Slam, or the chance to win all four in the same year. But we'll see how his body holds up. I mean, he's had health issues and injuries throughout his career, as we all know. But I think at this point, it's gotten more severe, where now he is talking more and more about this possibility of retirement. And every time he's talking after a match, it's I think he said it in Australia, he said it at some of the clay court swing that obviously has been so important to him throughout his career, and now he kind of keeps saying, I don't know if I'll be back here next year, I don't know how much longer I'll keep doing this, but that he's going to keep trying as long as he can. And I think it really says a lot. I mean, even there was a quote where he's talking about how he had to get these injections in his foot, just to even be able to play, and saying that if I have to take some anti-inflammatories before matches, that's one thing, but if I have to keep doing this, that's not necessarily aligned with with my values and who I am. So that's I think, as you mentioned, almost his role as the philosopher on tour, and I think it's really his own brand of philosophy, right? Where a lot of players, do think about winning more and do think about results more, and maybe in the back of his mind, he is to some degree, but I think the way that he answers questions, the way that he views things, it's often very process oriented. It's often very much comes from a place of humility. He's not going into matches assuming he's going to win. He's always giving his opponents credit. He's always saying, hey, if I'm going to have any chance to be successful, I need to, play my absolute best. He doesn't get ahead of himself in the middle of a tournament talking about winning it. He really does take things a day at a time. And maybe that's partly because of all the health issues and injuries that he's had, where he can't take things for granted, and he's not able to maybe look ahead in the same kind of a way that other people do or can, because of that uncertainty with his body. So maybe in certain ways that's been a blessing in disguise, because it has helped him. This is maybe me just speculating a little bit, but it's helped him appreciate every day and every tournament. And you can see how much it means to him when he does win, yet another French Open. And I think it's also important to recognize really this achievement in itself, the fact that he's won 14 French Opens, 14 Roland Garros titles.
Yeah. And Pete Sampras has won 14 majors, and we used to think that was like an untouchable thing. Rafa's done it at one event.
Right. And there's a Tennis Sandgren, and maybe controversial in certain ways, but he had a great tweet that said, it's very hard to win your local men's open 14 times, right? Or your local club championship, or whatever it is, local championship. and to win, the French Open 14 times. And also, I mean, throughout his career, when he was a younger player, when he was in his 20s, people were always saying, oh, the way he's, all these injuries, the way he plays, so physical, he's not going to be able to last, right? And now to see him, at age 36 playing at this level and with this kind of dominance on clay, it is just it's just incredible to see. It really is, and I think his mindset really has played such a big role in that.
Yeah. I think one thing we should talk about with Nadal too is the match against Alexander Zverev. Obviously ended in a very unfortunate way. They hadn't even completed two sets, and they basically played 3 hours. I don't know how. If that had gone 5 sets, who knows how long that would have been, or what would have happened to the person who won and lost. Um, but of course, yeah, the way it ended with Zverev's injury was tragic. That's not the way you want matches to end. And I think it was important to note. And Joel Drucker had a very nice article on tennis.com about Nadal's choice to be human, to be a good person first in that moment than a tennis player. I think Nadal was quoted as, "It's more important to be a good person first than a good tennis player." And again, that just shows that yeah, we're all tennis players, but we're also human beings, and we're all experiencing these things. And Rafa, noted, hey, he's a colleague. We've practiced together. We know each other. It's only natural that I be concerned for his welfare and that I be there with him, through that process. And I think again, just another lesson for us, and we've talked about this in multiple episodes, the importance of emphasizing being a good person first, emphasizing good sporting behavior over winning. These are the things that help develop your character and create your reputation. Um, and that lives long past any memories of your wins and losses. And I think this is just another example of Rafa living by this philosophy, these set of values that he has in showing concern for Alexander Zverev after this horrific injury. Um, like he said, that's not the way he wants to get into the final. Um, so I thought that was a nice, not that it was a pleasant circumstances, but it was a nice way to see the humanity of what tennis players can be in such a difficult position.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm glad that you brought that up. That was, yeah, for anyone that saw that injury, or even if you didn't actually see the video, if you just heard about it, it was pretty gruesome and obviously very unfortunate. Um, I mean, in many ways, Zverev had been outplaying Nadal actually at that point in the match. I mean,
And he had
Nadal,
played great against Alcaraz, right? I mean, he was
yep,
playing brilliantly in this tournament. You could see him
yes,
winning this match, even though he'd lost the first set.
absolutely. I mean, he was up a break in that first set. I think he served forward at 5-4, and he was actually up 6-2 in the first set tiebreaker. And Nadal ended up winning and, winning that set. And then they were they had just gotten to 6-all in the second set. So, he was playing great. He was, you know, had certainly was very much in the match at that point. And yeah, I think, just the way that Nadal handled it, and rather than being excited to win the match or to to get to the final, really showing that humanity and showing what's most important. And I think I would also say that we often do see that when a player gets hurt, the other player comes over to their side of the court to check in on them. I think that's often the brighter side of tennis when we see those moments rather than players going at it. We see that humanity, we see that sportsmanship. Those are the moments I think we all love to see. But yeah, it was obviously we all hope for the best for him and a speedy recovery. Hopefully, he can play Wimbledon and everything. But no, I'm glad that you brought up that moment.
I think the other thing that match highlighted for me, Josh, and we talked a little bit about this before recording, was and you mentioned Zverev was up, he was serving for it in the first. He was up 6-2 in the first set tiebreaker. Is the importance of simply keeping yourself mentally and emotionally in these matches, especially these tough struggles. And that's what Rafael Nadal does in these matches. He forces you to win it. When we talked about the concept of like not losing matches, Djokovic, Nadal, they're great at that. They're great at, um, if you're going to beat those guys, you actually have to go out and win it. And so Nadal, he was brilliant from 6-2 down. And I think he hit like the only forehand winners of the entire set came in the tiebreaker there. And then again in the second, he's keeping himself in the match. And the reason that this is important, and I think it's important for all of us that are listening to this, is that if you can keep yourself, in a certain range mentally and emotionally, and get yourself to the end of a set, you'll be more present minded, you'll be more self aware to take advantage of an opportunity that may present itself. So, for example, if you're playing a match and it doesn't even matter how well you're playing, but you get yourself to 5-all, there might be an opportunity at, say, 5-all, 30-all. Can you be awake and aware enough in that moment to say, all right, hey, doesn't matter how I've got here, doesn't matter how I've been playing, I'm here. Can I take this opportunity? And that is what I think players like Nadal and Djokovic are very, very good at, is they get themselves to the ends of sets and then they know if they can be aware and be present, they have a really good chance of pulling it out. And when you reflect and look back on matches that these guys have played, and I think we pointed out that Alcaraz actually did that really well against Djokovic in Madrid. He was present and was able to take the match. So that's just something I think, for all the listeners to understand is keep yourself in it mentally and emotionally. Don't get too high, too low. Just stick with it. Doesn't matter how well you're playing, really. If you can get deep into that set, open yourself up to the possibility, I have an opportunity here. I can take advantage here. Let me play with some courage in that moment. And I think that's what
Well,
Rafa did against
uh,
Zverev, right?
no, definitely, and I think it can be very easy for people to fall into this trap of, okay, I'm down 5-2. Okay, this set is over. Might as well start thinking about the next set. Where, I think if you can think from the other player's perspective, first of all, recognizing the other player is probably tight, whether it's 5-all, whether it's to close out a set. So remembering that, I think, is always really important. And the fact that even at the highest level of the game, people come back from being behind all the time. People have a tough time closing out sets constantly. So if you can, not beat yourself and stay in it mentally, you give yourself a chance. And then you force them to have to earn it and to have to close it out rather than handing it to them. So I think that's a great point. And I think that's what those players, Nadal and Djokovic in particular, do. They don't beat themselves in those moments. They stay in it. They give themselves a chance, and they don't always win them. They're not guaranteed to come back and win them, but they're giving themselves a chance. And oftentimes, we saw it in Australia with Medvedev, or we saw it with Sebastian Korda against Nadal as well. We've seen it countless times where Djokovic has come back, and you stay in it mentally, you give yourself a chance, and then maybe the other player gets tight. Maybe the other player throws in a couple unforced errors. But you allow that to potentially happen, where if you're so frustrated about being at 5-all and you have expected the match to be over because you were up 5-2, then, that frustration, that, not being present and playing each point, but constantly looking back towards the past and maybe regret or frustration, is going to really impact your chances to make it happen when it really counts.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the major themes that I was thinking of, Josh. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on, Roland Garros 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are, I think we covered a lot there. I mean, I think, if there are certain topics that we we didn't cover or certain important themes, would love to hear from our audience. You can certainly reach out to us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com with comments, with questions, with things that maybe we didn't mention. We always do love to hear from you guys. But no, I think those were the main points. I mean, I'm interested in seeing how we mentioned the finalists who both lost, Coco Gauff and Casper Ruud. I think both of them have a very, very, very bright future, and interested to see how they do. The other thing we didn't even mention, Casper Ruud has been training at Rafael Nadal's academy and has played there for the last few years, and Nadal has been his idol. And I think it's really interesting that we're at this point in tennis where some of these players at the top of the game, whether it be Nadal or Federer, Djokovic, Serena, Venus, could think of some other examples too, have been around for so long that there are players who grew up watching these guys, and watching these players who now they're competitors, and I think that's so cool, and I think it shows. It just shows their longevity and shows that now they can almost take a different role, where I think all of these players have now mentored other players from their country and mentored I think Nadal through his academy. That's another opportunity to help produce some of the young up and coming rising players. So I think that's another piece to this. But yeah, just very excited to see how Coco and Casper do going forward.
In his post-match interview on American television, Casper Ruud talked about how formative it was for him to spend that time at the Nadal Academy, how appreciative he was of Rafa's time and the coach's time there, and yeah, just how much it's contributed to him developing as a player. So I think it's really interesting, not only playing against your idols, but maybe even your idols are helping that next generation to be great. And I agree with you that both of these players, I think, have a very bright future. I really like the way, this is not really the topic for today, but I like the way that Casper Ruud plays the game in terms of his targets within the court. Um, Very, very smart, very good about that. So I think he definitely has a bright future, certainly on clay. It'll be exciting to see what these players do over the course of the summer. We've got Wimbledon coming up. Obviously, that's got more complications this year than in the past. So we'll see what that tournament holds for us. But certainly the U.S. Open is going to be a really great time to see lots of these players, developing their skills, and we'll see where they are. So, well, that is our show for today. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. As Josh mentioned, if you have any feedback or questions for us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check out our Instagram account. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.